Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's chilling story, I want you to settle in somewhere comfortable, because what you're about to hear will take you on a journey through one of the most disturbing cases I've ever encountered. This is a story about silence, the kind that exists between heartbeats, between words left unsaid, and between the moment before everything changes forever. It's a tale that will make you question how well you really know the people closest to you. As always, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Let me know where you're listening from. You at home, on a walk, maybe driving through the night. And once you've heard the whole story, tell me what your favorite part was. Your engagement means everything to me. If you enjoy these deep dives into the darkest corners of human nature, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that will keep you awake long after the telling ends. Now, let's begin with a case that started with a missing person report and ended with revelations that shattered an entire community's sense of safety. Detective Sarah Chen had been staring at the same case file for 3 hours when her phone rang at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. The rain hammered against her apartment windows like desperate fingers, and the coffee in her mug had long since grown cold. She almost didn't answer. "Chen here, detective. We've got something you need to see." Officer Rodriguez's voice carried that particular tension she'd learned to recognize over her 15 years on the force. It was the sound of someone who'd just witnessed something that would follow them home. "What's the location?" 1247 Maple Grove Lane, the Whitmore house. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She knew that address. Everyone in Millbrook knew the Whitmore family. James Whitmore owned the largest construction company in 3 counties, and his wife Eleanor ran the local historical society. Their daughter Emma had been homecoming queen just 2 years ago before heading off to Northwestern on a full scholarship. "What happened?" The daughter called it in. "Says her mother's missing, but detective, there's blood. A lot of it." 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in Whitmore's pristine living room, water dripping from her coat onto the hardwood floors that Eleanor Whitmore had probably spent hours selecting. The room looked like a magazine spread, all cream-colored furniture and carefully arranged family photos, except for the dark stain that had soaked into the Persian rug near the fireplace. Emma Whitmore sat on the couch, her Northwestern sweatshirt stained with what Sarah hoped was just tears. At 19, she had her mother's delicate features and her father's strong jaw, but right now she looked like a frightened child. "Tell me what happened, Emma." "I came home for fall break this morning." Emma's voice shook as she spoke. "Mum was supposed to pick me up from the train station, but she never showed. I took an Uber, thinking maybe she forgot, but when I got here, she gestured toward the stain with a trembling hand." "Was the door unlocked when you arrived?" "No, I used my key. Everything looked normal from outside." Sarah studied the scene. The blood pool was substantial, but not immediately fatal amounts. No signs of struggle in the surrounding area. No broken furniture or scattered objects. Whatever happened here had been swift and contained. "Where's your father?" "Business trip, Phoenix. He left Sunday morning, won't be back until Thursday." "Have you tried calling your mother?" "About 50 times. It goes straight to voicemail." Officer Rodriguez approached, his notebook in hand. "We've checked the house top to bottom. No sign of Mrs. Whitmore, but we found something interesting upstairs." He led them to the master bedroom, where the king-sized bed was perfectly made. Pillows fluffed and arranged just so. But on the nightstand, beside Eleanor's side of the bed, sat her phone, purse, and car keys. If she left voluntarily, She didn't take much with her, Rodriguez observed. Sarah examined the items more closely. Eleanor's phone showed 17 missed calls from Emma, all from the past few hours. The purse contained her wallet with credit, cards and cash intact. The car keys belonged to the silver Mercedes sitting in the driveway. Emma, did your mother have any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt her? Mum, Emma looked genuinely surprised. Everyone loved Mum. She organized charity drives, helped with community events. She was the kind of person who remembered your birthday and brought soup when you were sick. But Sarah had learned long ago that the people who seemed most beloved often harbored the darkest secrets. She made a mental note to dig deeper into Eleanor Whitmore's seemingly perfect life as she prepared to leave. Emma grabbed her arm. Detective, there's something else. Something strange. What is it? When I was looking for Mum earlier, I checked her calendar on the kitchen counter. She had written something for today, but it was just weird symbols, not words, like some kind of code. Sarah felt the familiar tingle that came with the first real clue. Show me. In the kitchen, Eleanor's day planner lay open to October 15th. In her neat handwriting were the usual appointments: dentist at 2 p.m, book club at 4 p.m, but at 7 p.m. instead of words. There was a sequence of symbols that looked almost like hieroglyphics. Sarah photographed the page, her mind already racing. In 15 years of police work, she'd never seen anything quite like this. Whatever Eleanor Whitmore had gotten herself into, it was something far more complex than a simple disappearance. As she drove home through the rain-soaked streets of Millbrook, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this case would be different from all the others. There was something about the pristine house, the mysterious symbols, and the pool of blood with no body that felt like the opening notes of a symphony written in a minor key. She had no idea how right she was. The next morning brought no relief from the October chill, and Sarah arrived at the Millbrook Police Department to find the coffee machine broken and her partner, Detective Mike Torres, holding 2 cups from the diner across the street. Figured you'd need the caffeine, he said, handing her the steaming cup. I ran the preliminary forensics on that blood sample, and it's Eleanor Whitmore's owner Gators, matches her medical records. But here's the interesting part. Tits, not all from the same time. Sarah looked up from her coffee, meaning some of it's fresh, maybe 12 to 18 hours old. But there are traces that are older, maybe a week, possibly more. So, whatever happened to Eleanor Whitmore, it wasn't the first incident. That's what I'm thinking. Sarah spread the crime scene photos across her desk. The bloodstain looked different in the harsh fluorescent light of the station, more ominous somehow. What about those symbols from her calendar? Torres pulled out a folder. I had my cousin Maria take a look. She's a linguistics professor at the community college. She says they're not from any known alphabet or writing system she can identify, but they have structure, like they mean something specific. A code, maybe. Or maybe Eleanor Whitmore was losing her mind. But Sarah didn't think so. Everything about the Whitmore house had been too organized, too deliberate for someone suffering from mental illness. Eleanor had planned whatever happened to her, even if she hadn't planned to disappear. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ask Emma about the basement. Sarah stared at the message, her pulse quickening. Mike, did we check the basement at the Whitmore house? Rodriguez said they did a full sweep. Let's go back. An hour later, they stood in the Whitmore's finished basement. It looked like every suburban family's attempt at a recreation room: leather furniture, a big screen TV, built-in bookshelves lined with hardcover novels and family photos albums. Nothing seemed out of place. Emma had let them in reluctantly. "I already told you everything I know. We just want to be thorough," Sarah said, running her hand along the bookshelf. Her fingers caught on something. One of the photo albums was protruding slightly from the shelf, as if it had been removed and replaced hastily. She pulled it out and opened it to find family photos spanning the past 5 years. Birthday parties, vacations, Christmas mornings. The Whitmores looked happy in every picture, like something out of a holiday commercial. But as she flipped through the pages, Sarah noticed something odd. In every photo from the past year, Eleanor's smile looked forced. Her eyes held a darkness that hadn't been there in the earlier pictures. "Emma, did your mother seem different lately? Worried about anything?" Emma shifted uncomfortably. She'd been quieter, more secretive. Sometimes I'd catch her staring out the window for long periods, like she was watching for something. "Did you ask her about it?" "I tried, but she'd just say she was fine and change the subject." Sarah continued examining the basement, her trained eye cataloging every detail. It was Torres who found it a section of the wood paneling that didn't quite align with the rest. When he pressed against it, it gave slightly. "Emma, is there supposed to be a hidden panel here?" "I don't know anything about that." Torres worked his fingers around the edge until he found the mechanism. The panel swung inward, revealing a small space behind the wall. Inside was a metal box about the size of a shoebox. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she opened it. Inside were dozens of photographs, but these weren't family snapshots. They were surveillance photos, images of people taken from a distance, often without the subject's knowledge. Some showed individuals entering and leaving buildings. Others captured license plates or street addresses. At the bottom of the box was a leather journal. Eleanor's handwriting filled every page. But unlike her neat script in the day planner upstairs, this writing was urgent, almost frantic. "They know I know. Read one entry dated 3 weeks ago. The meetings aren't random. There's a pattern to everything they do, and I've figured it out. They're using the children," said another entry. "God help me. They're using the children, and no one else sees it." The final entry, dated just 2 days before Eleanor's disappearance, contained only the symbols from her calendar and a single line. "If something happens to me, look for the silence between heartbeats." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement's temperature. Eleanor Whitmore hadn't been kidnapped or murdered by a random stranger. She'd stumbled onto something that someone was willing to kill to keep secret. "Emma, I need you to think carefully. Did your mother ever mention being afraid of someone specific? Did she talk about any meetings or people she didn't trust?" Emma's face had gone pale as she looked at the photographs spread across the floor. "I've never seen any of this before. Mom never said anything about being scared of anyone." But Sarah could see the lie in Emma's eyes. The girl knew something, even if she didn't realize what it was yet. As they packed up the evidence, Sarah's phone buzzed again with another message from the unknown number. "Eleanor found the truth. Now they have her. You're next if you don't stop looking." Sarah showed the message to Torres, who frowned and immediately started typing on his phone. "I'm having tech trace this number," he said. But Sarah had a feeling that whoever was sending these messages was too smart to be caught that easily. Eleanor Whitmore had discovered something that threatened powerful people, and now Sarah was walking down the same dangerous path. As they left the Whitmore house, Sarah looked back at the perfectly manicured lawn and the white picket fence that surrounded the property. From the outside, it looked like the American dream. But she was beginning to understand that sometimes the most beautiful facades hid the ugliest truths. The anonymous number turned out to be a burner phone purchased with cash at a convenience store whose security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned that day. Sarah wasn't surprised. Whoever Eleanor Whitmore had been investigating knew how to cover their tracks. She spent the next morning going through Eleanor's journal more carefully, trying to decode the scattered observations and cryptic notes. Torres had made copies of all the surveillance photos, and they covered the conference room wall like pieces of a macabre puzzle. "Look at this," Torres said, pointing to a series of photos showing a man in his 50s entering what appeared to be an office building. This guy shows up in 12 different photos over the past month. Sarah studied the images. The man was unremarkable average height, thinning brown hair, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting him. But Eleanor had been watching him closely. "Can you make out the building he's entering?" "Working on it." Torres adjusted his reading glasses and squinted at the photos. "The angle's not great, but I think it's the Millbrook Medical Center." Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. According to her journal, Eleanor had noticed a pattern in these meetings. People going in and out of buildings at specific times, always following the same routes. "Mike, pull up everything we have on missing persons in Millbrook for the past 2 years." While Torres worked on his computer, Sarah studied Eleanor's handwritten notes more carefully. The woman had been methodical in her observations, noting times, dates, weather conditions, even what people were wearing. It read like the journal of a trained investigator. "Sarah, you need to see this." Torres's voice carried a note of alarm that made her look up immediately. "What is it?" "Missing persons reports for the past 2 years. We have 17 cases. But here's the weird part. 14 of them involve people between the ages of 16 and 22. Teenagers and young adults. And they all disappeared on dates that match entries in Eleanor's journal." Sarah felt her blood turn cold. The surveillance photos suddenly took on a sinister new meaning. Eleanor hadn't been following random people she'd been tracking a pattern of disappearances that no one else had noticed. Where are the case files? That's the problem. According to the system, most of them were classified as runaways and closed without investigation. By who? Torres checked his screen. Detective Ray Morrison, mostly. A few by Detective Collins before he retired. Sarah knew both men. Morrison was in his early 50s, a 20-year veteran who'd grown increasingly cynical over the years. Collins had retired 6 months ago after a long career that some whispered had been too close to certain local businessmen. "I want to talk to Morrison." They found Detective Morrison in the break room, stirring sugar into his coffee with the methodical precision of someone who'd performed the same ritual thousands of times. "Ray, we need to talk about some missing persons cases you handled." Morrison looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "Which ones?" 17 cases over the past 2 years, all ruled as runaways. Kids run away all the time, Chen, especially in a town like this where nothing ever happens. They get bored, think the grass is greener somewhere else. 14 of them were between 16 and 22. Prime runaway age. Sarah laid one of Eleanor's surveillance photos on the table. "What about this? Recognize the location." Morrison glanced at the photo and shrugged. Could be anywhere. But Sarah had been watching his eyes, and she'd seen the flicker of recognition before he'd controlled his expression. Morrison knew more than he was saying. "Ray, Eleanor Whitmore is missing. We found evidence that she was investigating these disappearances before she vanished. Eleanor Whitmore's probably having a midlife crisis. Happens to a lot of women her age. She'll turn up in a few days with some story about needing to find herself. The dismissiveness in Morrison's tone made Sarah's jaw clench. There was blood. Ray, a lot of it. Maybe she cut herself packing. Maybe she had a nosebleed. Blood doesn't always mean violence. Sarah gathered up the photo and stood. Something in Morrison's behavior was setting off every alarm bell in her head, but she couldn't prove anything yet. As they walked back to their desks, Torres leaned close. He's lying. I know. The question is why. That afternoon, Sarah decided to visit the families of some of the missing teenagers. The first address belonged to Maria Santos, whose 16-year-old son Carlos had disappeared 8 months ago. Mrs. Santos lived in a small house on the south side of town, where the lawns weren't quite as green and the cars in the driveways were older and showed more rust. She answered the door with the wary expression of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. Mrs. Santos, I'm Detective Chen. I'd like to ask you some questions about your son Carlos. The police said he ran away. Case closed. I'm not so sure about that. Something in Sarah's tone must have convinced her, because Mrs. Santos stepped aside and let her in. The living room was small but immaculately clean, with school photos of Carlos covering the mantelpiece. He'd been a handsome kid with his mother's dark eyes and a smile that suggested he'd found the world amusing. Tell me about the day Carlos disappeared. He went to school like normal, had basketball practice after. His coach said he left around 6 p.m., but he never came home. Did he seem worried about anything? Any problems at school or with friends? Mrs. Santos shook her head. Carlos was happy. He had a girlfriend, good grades, plans to play basketball in college. Why would he run? Away from that. What did Detective Morrison tell you when you reported him missing? Said teenage boys run off all the time. Said Carlos probably met some girl and would come home when he got tired of sleeping rough. Mrs. Santos's voice grew bitter. But I know my son. He wouldn't do that to me. Sarah spent another hour with Mrs. Santos, taking notes and asking questions that should have been asked 8 months ago. When she left, she had a clear picture of a responsible teenager who'd had every reason to stay and no reason to leave. The next house belonged to the Thompsons, whose 17-year-old daughter, Ashley, had vanished 6 months ago. The story was remarkably similar. Good kid with no problems, who'd simply failed to come home one day. By the time Sarah had visited 4 families, a pattern had emerged that made her stomach turn. These weren't troubled runaways fleeing dysfunction. These were well-adjusted young people from loving homes who'd simply vanished without a trace. And according to Eleanor's journal, she'd figured that out too. Sarah's phone rang as she drove back to the station. The caller ID showed Emma Whitmore's number. Detective Chen, I remembered something about Mum. What is it? A few weeks ago, she asked me about some of my friends from high school, kids who'd graduated with me. She wanted to know if I'd heard from them lately. Which friends? Ashley Thompson and Carlos Santos and Marcus Webb. Sarah pulled over to the side of the road. Emma, when did Marcus Webb disappear? About 4 months ago, right after he started his sophomore year at the community college. 3 of the missing young people had been connected to Emma Whitmore. That couldn't be a coincidence. Emma, I need you to be very careful. Don't go anywhere alone, and don't trust anyone you don't absolutely have to. Detective, what did my mother find out? Sarah looked out at the quiet suburban street, with its neat houses and well-tended gardens. Somewhere in this peaceful community, Someone was taking young people and making them disappear. Eleanor Whitmore had figured out who, and now she was gone too. I think your mother discovered that Millbrook isn't as safe as everyone believes. Dr. Harrison Voss had practiced medicine in Millbrook for 23 years, and in that time he'd delivered half the babies in town and treated 3 generations of some families. His office in the Millbrook Medical Center was exactly what you'd expect from a small-town family. Doctor diplomas on the walls, comfortable chairs, and a reassuring bedside manner that had earned him the trust of virtually everyone in the community, which was why Sarah felt distinctly uncomfortable as she sat across from him, studying his reaction to her questions about Eleanor Whitmore. Eleanor was a patient of mine for about 15 years, Dr. Voss said, his hands folded calmly on his desk. A lovely woman, always very health conscious. When did you last see her? Oh, it must have been 6 months ago. Routine checkup. Nothing unusual. Sarah consulted her notes. What about October 8th? Do you have any record of her visiting your office that day? Something flickered across Dr. Voss's face, so quickly that Sarah almost missed it. I'd have to check my appointment book. Please do. Dr. Voss opened a leather-bound appointment book and flipped through the pages with practiced efficiency. October 8th. No, I don't show any appointment with Eleanor Whitmore that day. But Sarah had seen one of Eleanor's surveillance photos that showed Dr. Voss entering the medical center on October 8th at 7:15 p.m., well after normal office hours. Dr. Voss, do you ever see patients after hours? Occasionally, in emergencies. But I would have a record of that. What about the other missing young people? Carlos Santos, Ashley Thompson, Marcus Webb. Were any of them patients of yours? I'd have to check their files, but yes, I believe I've treated all of them at various times. This is a small town, detective. I've probably treated half the people in Millbrook at some point. Dr. Voss's answers were smooth and professional, but Sarah noticed that he'd avoided making eye contact when discussing the missing teenagers. In her experience, even innocent people became nervous when questioned by police. But Dr. Voss seemed almost rehearsed in his responses. Doctor, I need to ask you about your evening activities. Specifically, what you do after your office closes. I beg your pardon. We have evidence that Eleanor Whitmore was conducting surveillance on several individuals before her disappearance. We believe she may have observed you meeting with people outside of normal business hours. Dr. Voss's composure finally cracked slightly. Detective, I'm not sure what you're implying, but I have never done anything improper with any patient, and I resent the suggestion. I'm not suggesting anything improper. I'm trying to understand what Eleanor Whitmore saw that made her feel she needed to document your activities. I have no idea what Eleanor thought she saw, but I can assure you that my after-hours activities are perfectly legitimate. Sarah made a note to get a warrant for Dr. Voss's appointment records and any security footage from the medical center. Something about the doctor's manner was triggering every instinct she'd developed over 15 years of police work. As she prepared to leave, Dr. Voss's nurse, a middle-aged woman named Janet, approached her in the waiting room. Detective could I speak with you privately? They stepped outside, where Janet lit a cigarette with shaking hands. I've worked for Dr. Voss for 12 years, she said. He's a good doctor, but lately he's been different. Different how? Secretive. He's been having meetings after hours, people I don't recognize. And some of the patient files have gone missing. Which files? Young people, mostly. Teenagers and people in their early 20s. When I asked Dr. Voss about it, he said they'd been digitized, and the hard copies destroyed, but we don't have a digital system. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Janet, how long has this been going on? About 2 years. Maybe a little longer. The same time frame as the disappearances. Sarah handed Janet her business card. If you think of anything else, anything at all, please call me. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment with Eleanor's journal spread across her coffee table, trying to piece together the timeline. Eleanor had been watching Dr. Voss for months, documenting his after-hours meetings and photographing people entering and leaving the medical center. The final entry in Eleanor's journal mentioned the children, and now Sarah had confirmation that Dr. Voss had been meeting with unknown people and that patient files for young adults had mysteriously disappeared. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Torres's name appeared on the caller ID. Sarah, we got the warrant for the medical center. You're not going to believe what we found. What is it? Security footage from the past 6 months. Eleanor Whitmore was right to be watching that place. Dr. Voss has been having regular meetings with some very interesting people. Who? Ray Morrison, for one, and Judge Catherine Walsh, and City Councilman David Price. Sarah felt the case shifting beneath her feet like unstable ground. Some of the most respected people in Millbrook had been meeting secretly with Dr. Voss, and now young people were disappearing. Mike, we need to be very careful about who we trust from now on. Already thought of that. I've been in touch with the state police. If this goes as deep as I think it does, we're going to need outside help. After hanging up, Sarah poured herself a glass of wine and tried to process what she'd learned. Eleanor Whitmore had stumbled onto something that involved not just a small-town doctor, but law enforcement and local government officials. The surveillance photos took on a more sinister meaning now. Eleanor hadn't just been documenting suspicious behavior, she had been building evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Millbrook's power structure. And now she was gone, just like the young people she'd been trying to protect. Sarah's wine glass froze halfway to her lips as a terrible possibility occurred to her. What if Eleanor Whitmore wasn't dead? What if she was being held somewhere, along with the missing teenagers? She grabbed her phone and called Torres. Mike, I need you to run a check on any properties owned by Dr. Voss, Judge Walsh, Councilman Price, and Morrison. Look for anything remote, anything that could be used to hold multiple people. You think they're keeping them somewhere, I think. Eleanor discovered that 17 young people didn't run away, they were taken. And if I'm right, some of them might still be alive. Sarah spent the rest of the night going through property records and tax assessments, building a list of potential locations where the missing people might be held. By dawn, she had 12 possibilities, ranging from abandoned warehouses to remote farms. But as she prepared to begin searching these locations, her phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. Stop looking, or Emma will join her mother. This time, the message included a photo of Emma Whitmore walking across the Northwestern University campus. Unaware that someone was photographing her from a distance, Sarah's blood turned to ice. The conspiracy had resources and reach that extended far beyond Millbrook. Emma was in danger, and Sarah was running out of time to save both her and her mother. The silence between heartbeats had become a countdown to tragedy. Sarah was on the road to Northwestern University by 6 a.m., her gun secured in its shoulder holster, and Torres riding shotgun with a thermos of coffee and a growing sense of unease. I still think we should have brought back up, he said as they crossed the state line into Illinois. We can't trust anyone in Millbrook right now. For all we know, half the department could be involved. They'd spent the early morning hours coordinating with the state police. But Sarah knew that bureaucracy moved slowly, and Emma Whitmore might not have time for proper procedures. The photo of Emma on campus had been taken less than 20 hours ago, which meant her watchers were close. Sarah's phone rang as they pulled into the visitor parking lot at Northwestern. The caller ID showed Emma's number. "Emma, where are you right now?" "In my dorm room, detective. Something weird happened last night." "What kind of weird?" "Someone slipped a note under my door. It just said, 'Go home now, or you'll never see your mother again.'" Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "Emma, I need you to pack a bag right now. Don't tell anyone where you're going. We're coming to get you." "What's happening? What did my mother find out?" "I'll explain everything when we get there. Right now, I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say." 20 minutes later, Emma Whitmore sat in the back seat of Sarah's unmarked police car, a duffel bag at her feet and fear written across her face. She looked younger than her 19 years, more like the frightened child Sarah had met in the blood-stained living room just days ago. "My mother's not dead, is she?" Emma asked as they drove back toward Millbrook. "I don't think so. I think she's being held somewhere, along with other people who've gone missing." "The teenagers?" "Yes, Emma, I need to ask you about something. In your mother's journal, she wrote about meetings and patterns. Did she ever mention specific people?" She was watching. Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the passing farmland. "She asked me weird questions sometimes. About Dr. Voss." "What kind of questions?" "She wanted to know if he'd ever made me uncomfortable during appointments. If he'd ever asked me personal questions that seemed inappropriate." Sarah exchanged a glance with Torres. "Had he, a few times?" "Nothing really bad, but sometimes he'd ask about my dating life, or if I was sexually active. I figured it was just medical stuff, but Mom seemed really concerned about it." "Did she ask about your friends too?" "Yeah, she wanted to know about Carlos and Ashley and Marcus. She asked if any of them had mentioned Dr. Voss, or if they'd seemed worried about anything before they disappeared." The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture that made Sarah's stomach churn. Dr. Voss had been using his position to gain information about young people in the community, possibly even targeting specific individuals. "Emma, I need you to think carefully. Did your mother ever mention anyone else besides Dr. Voss?" "She said something once about people in town not being who they seemed to be. She said some of the most trusted people were hiding terrible secrets." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. This one wasn't from the unknown number. What was from Torres's contact at the state police. "Property search complete. Found something interesting. Judge Walsh owns a farm about 30 miles outside town. Purchased under a shell company 2 years ago." Sarah felt her pulse accelerate. The timing matched perfectly with the beginning of the disappearances. "Mike, call ahead and get us a tactical team. We're going to need backup for this." But even as she made plans to search Judge Walsh's property, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The conspiracy had shown remarkable awareness of their investigation so far, and she doubted they'd be able to approach any location undetected. Her fears were confirmed when her phone rang with a call from an unknown local number. "Detective Chen, you're making a mistake." The voice was electronically distorted, impossible to identify. "Stop looking for what can't be found." "Where is Eleanor Whitmore?" "Eleanor Whitmore should have minded her own business. Just like you should mind yours." "What happened to the missing teenagers?" There was a long pause before the voice responded. Some secrets are worth killing for, detective. Remember that before you go any further. The line went dead. Emma had heard enough of the conversation to understand the implications. They're going to kill us, aren't they? Not if I can help it, Sarah said grimly. But Emma, I need you to understand something. We're dealing with people who have resources and connections throughout the community. From now on, we trust no one except each other. As they drove toward the coordinates Torres had received for Judge Walsh's farm, Sarah tried to prepare herself for what they might find. Eleanor's journal had referenced the children and mentioned that whatever was happening involved using young people in some way. The possibilities that ran through Sarah's mind were all horrific, and she found herself hoping that Eleanor Whitmore and the missing teenagers were dead rather than enduring whatever fate the conspiracy had planned for them. But she couldn't afford to think like that. Hope was the only thing that would keep her moving forward, and somewhere in the rural darkness ahead of them, people were counting on her to find them before it was too late. The silence between heartbeats had become the silence before the storm, and Sarah Chen was about to walk directly into its center. Judge Catherine Walsh's farm sat at the end of a gravel road that wound through 30 acres of cornfields and pasture land. From the outside, it looked like thousands of other rural properties in the Midwest. A white farmhouse, a red barn, and several outbuildings scattered across rolling hills. But as Sarah crouched in the tree line with Torres and 2 state police officers watching the property through binoculars, she could see details that set this place apart. Security cameras mounted on telephone poles, motion sensor lights every 50 yards, fresh tire tracks leading to the barn despite the fact that the farmhouse appeared to be unoccupied. This isn't a working farm, Officer Martinez from the state police observed. This is a fortress. Sarah had left Emma at a safe house an hour away, protected by 2 additional officers, while she and the tactical team prepared to search the property. Every instinct told her that they were finally close to answers, but her experience warned her to expect the worst. Radio check, Torres whispered into his headset. Team 2 in position, came the response from the officers covering the back of the property. Team 3 ready, reported the pair watching the access road. Sarah took one last look through her binoculars. The barn was the largest structure on the property, and the fresh tracks led directly to it. If Eleanor Whitmore and the missing teenagers were being held anywhere, that would be the logical place. Let's move. They approached the barn from the north side, staying low and using the cornrows for cover. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as they got closer, and she could hear Torres breathing heavily beside her. The barn doors were secured with a heavy padlock, but there was a smaller entrance on the side that appeared to be unlocked. Sarah positioned herself beside it while Torres covered her from the opposite side. She turned the handle slowly and eased the door open, just far enough to peer inside. What she saw made her stomach drop. The barn had been converted into something that looked like a cross between a medical facility and a prison. Rows of hospital beds lined the walls, each one equipped with restraints and foredrips. Medical equipment hummed quietly in the corners, and the smell of antiseptic couldn't quite mask an underlying odor of fear and desperation. But it was the occupants of those beds that made Sarah's blood turn to ice. She counted 12 people, all young, all unconscious or heavily sedated. Some she recognized from the missing persons files: Carlos Santos, Ashley Thompson, Marcus Webb. Others were faces she didn't know, but who fit the same profile: teenagers and young adults who should have been living normal lives instead of lying motionless in this nightmare facility, and in the bed closest to the door, her dark hair spread across a white pillow, was Eleanor Whitmore. Sarah whispered into her radio. "We've found them. Repeat. We have located the missing persons. Medical team to the barn immediately." She pushed the door open wider and stepped inside, her weapon drawn and her eyes scanning for any sign of guards or surveillance. The barn appeared to be empty except for the victims. But Sarah wasn't taking any chances. Torres entered behind her, his face pale as he took in the scene. "Jesus Christ, Sarah, what the hell is this place? Some kind of medical facility? Look at all this equipment." Sarah approached Eleanor's bed cautiously. The woman was alive. Her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, but she was clearly unconscious. An IV line ran into her arm, feeding her a clear liquid from a bag marked only with a series of numbers. "Torres, call for an ambulance. Multiple ambulances. And get me a hazmat team. We don't know what they're being drugged with." As Torres made the calls, Sarah moved through the barn, checking on each victim. Most were unconscious, but a few stirred slightly when she spoke to them. One girl, who couldn't have been more than 17, opened her eyes briefly and tried to speak before falling back into drugged sleep. "Help is coming," Sarah whispered to each of them. "You're safe now." But even as she said the words, Sarah knew they weren't entirely true. Whatever had been done to these people over the past months or years, the effects might be permanent, and the people responsible were still out there, probably planning their next move. Her radio crackled with Torres's voice. "Sarah, we've got company. 3 vehicles approaching from the south." Sarah's blood chilled. They'd been discovered, and now they were trapped in the barn with 12 helpless victims and nowhere to run. How long until backup arrives? 10 minutes? Maybe 15? Too long. Sarah looked around the barn, taking inventory of possible defensive positions and escape routes. The medical equipment could provide some cover, but they were vastly outnumbered. If the approaching vehicles were full of armed conspirators, "All teams, we have hostile vehicles approaching. Take defensive positions and prepare for contact." Sarah positioned herself near Eleanor's bed, her weapon trained on the main entrance. Whatever happened next, she was determined that these people wouldn't suffer any more than they already had. The sound of car doors slamming echoed across the farm, followed by voices she couldn't quite make out. Sarah counted at least 6 different people, all of them moving with the purposeful coordination of a well-trained team. Her radio buzzed with a voice she recognized. "Detective Morrison. Detective Chen. This is Morrison. Stand down and come out. With your hands visible." Sarah felt a mixture of rage and vindication. Morrison's presence confirmed her suspicions about corruption within the Millbrook Police Department, but it also meant they were facing trained law enforcement officers rather than amateur criminals. "Morrison, this is Chen. I have 12 victims of kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment. Surrender yourselves immediately." Morrison's laughter crackled through the radio. "Sarah, you have no idea what you've stumbled into. These people aren't victims, they're volunteers in a research program that's going to revolutionize medicine. Volunteers don't need to be restrained and drugged. Sometimes volunteers change their minds. We're simply ensuring they fulfill their commitments." The casual way Morrison discussed the imprisoned young people made Sarah's finger tighten on her weapon's trigger. Whatever research was being conducted here, it was clearly against the victim's will. What kind of research? The kind that requires absolute secrecy and complete compliance. The kind that will make certain people very wealthy and very powerful. Sarah heard footsteps approaching the barn from multiple directions. They were surrounded, outgunned, and running out of time. But then she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, sirens in the distance, growing louder by the second. Morrison, that's the state police. You have about 2 minutes to surrender before this gets much worse for everyone involved. There was a long pause before Morrison responded. You've made a very serious mistake, Chen. Some secrets are too important to let one small-town detective destroy them. The barn doors burst open, and Sarah found herself face to face with the man she'd worked alongside for 3 years. Morrison held a pistol in one hand and a radio in the other, and his expression was cold and calculating. Step away from the beds, Sarah. Behind Morrison, she could see other figures in the doorway: Dr. Voss, Judge Walsh, and 3 men she didn't recognize but who carried themselves like private security. The research must continue, Dr. Voss said, his voice carrying the same professional tone he'd used in his office. These young people are contributing to something much larger than themselves. What research? Sarah demanded, keeping her weapon trained on Morrison. What are you doing to them? Judge Walsh stepped forward, her judicial robes replaced by a simple black suit that made her look more like a corporate executive than a pillar of the community. We're developing enhancement protocols, she said, ways to improve human, cognitive, and physical performance. The applications are limitless: military, intelligence, athletics, academics, human experimentation, human evolution, the sirens. We're getting closer, but Sarah knew that the next few minutes would determine whether she and the victims lived or died. The conspiracy had too much invested in their research to let it be exposed now. Morrison, it's over. The state police will be here any second. Morrison's smile was cold and humorless. Actually, Sarah, I think you'll find that this is just the beginning. The standoff lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, though to Sarah it felt like hours. She kept her weapon trained on Morrison while Dr. Voss and Judge Walsh flanked her on either side, their own guns drawn with the casual competence of people who'd done this before. The sirens grew louder until they seemed to fill the entire barn, and then suddenly stopped. Car doors slammed in rapid succession, followed by the sound of boots on gravel. This is the Illinois State Police. The building is surrounded. Come out with your hands visible. Morrison's confident expression faltered slightly. They can't have jurisdiction here. They do when it involves interstate kidnapping, Sarah said. Emma Whitmore was taken across state lines when you threatened her at Northwestern. Judge Walsh checked her watch, a gesture so casual it was almost obscene given the circumstances. Ray, initiate Protocol 7. Sarah didn't know what Protocol 7 was, but Morrison's reaction told her it was nothing good. He reached for his radio with his free hand, never taking his eyes or his gun off Sarah. All units, implement Protocol 7 immediately. What's Protocol 7? Sarah demanded. Dr. Voss answered with the clinical detachment of a medical professional. Elimination of evidence and witnesses. We can't allow this research to be compromised. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice as the implications hit her. They weren't just planning to escape, they were planning to kill everyone in the barn, including the unconscious victims who couldn't defend themselves. You're talking about murdering 12 innocent people. We're talking about protecting a project that could benefit millions, Judge Walsh replied. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good. Sarah heard movement outside the bar, not the organized approach of law enforcement, but something more chaotic. Shouting voices, the sound of running feet, and underneath it all, a low rumbling that she couldn't identify. Morrison was speaking rapidly into his radio, but his expression grew increasingly frustrated. Teams 4 and 5, respond. Teams 4 and 5, do you copy? Static was his only answer. Torres's voice came through Sarah's earpiece, so quietly she almost missed it. Sarah, we've got them surrounded. State Police Tactical Team is in position. When I give the signal, hit the deck. Sarah tensed, preparing to drop. But Judge Walsh must have seen something in her expression, because she raised her weapon and aimed it directly at Eleanor Whitmore's unconscious form. Detective Chen, I want you to put down your weapon and step away from the beds. If you hurt her, you're in no position to make threats. You have 10 seconds to comply, or Mrs. Whitmore dies, followed by every other person in this barn. Sarah looked at Eleanor's peaceful face, then at the other victims lying helplessly in their beds. Carlos Santos, who should have been playing college basketball. Ashley Thompson, who'd had plans to study veterinary medicine. All of them trapped in a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. 5 seconds, Detective. Sarah made her decision. She began to lower her weapon, gambling that Torres and the tactical team would act before Judge Walsh could carry out her threat. The barn exploded into chaos. Smoke grenades crashed through the windows, filling the air with thick grey clouds that made it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. Sarah dropped to the floor as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions. She crawled toward Eleanor's bed, trying to shield the unconscious woman with her own body while the battle raged around them. Through the smoke and noise, she could hear Morrison shouting orders and Dr. Voss screaming something about protecting the research data. A figure loomed out of the smoke beside her Torres, his face covered with a tactical mask and his weapon. Ready? Medical team is 30 seconds out, he yelled over the gunfire. We need to get these people stable for transport. Sarah nodded and began checking the 4 lines running into Eleanor's arm. Whatever drugs they'd been using to keep the victims unconscious, stopping the flow abruptly could be dangerous. The gunfire began to subside, replaced by the authoritative voices of law enforcement officers securing the scene. Sarah heard Morrison's voice, high and desperate, trying to negotiate some kind of deal. You don't understand what you're interfering with. This research could change everything. We're on the verge of breakthroughs that will revolutionize human potential. Ray Morrison, you're under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy, and attempted murder, came the response from the state police commander. Dr. Voss was led past Sarah in handcuffs, his medical bag clutched to his chest like a shield. The research must continue, he kept repeating. The research must continue. Judge Walsh was silent as she was arrested, her expression coldly calculating even in defeat. Sarah had the distinct impression that the woman was already planning her legal defense, probably confident that her connections and resources would help her escape serious consequences. But it was the 4th conspirator who worried Sarah the most. As the smoke cleared and the medical teams rushed in to attend to the victims, she realized that one of the armed men who'd entered with Morrison was nowhere to be found. Torres, we're missing someone. There were 6 people when they came in. Torres did a quick head count of the arrests being made outside the barn. You're right. One of them slipped away during the chaos. Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. The conspiracy was bigger than just the people they'd caught today, and at least one member was still free to continue their work or seek revenge. As Eleanor Whitmore was loaded onto a stretcher, her eyes fluttered open for the first time in days. She looked up at Sarah with confusion and fear, trying to speak through the effects of whatever drugs had been keeping her unconscious. "Emma," she whispered. "Where's Emma?" "She's safe," Sarah assured her. "Your daughter is safe, and you're going to be okay." Eleanor's grip on Sarah's hand was surprisingly strong. "The research. They're using the children for research. You have to stop them." "We did stop them. Morrison, Dr. Voss, Judge Walsh, they're all under arrest." Eleanor shook her head weakly. "Not all of them. There are others. People you don't suspect. The network goes deeper than you know." As Eleanor was carried away to the waiting ambulance, her words echoed in Sarah's mind. The arrests they'd made today might have been just the beginning, not the end. Looking around the barn at the medical equipment and the rows of beds where young people had been held against their will, Sarah realized that solving Eleanor Whitmore's disappearance had led them into something much larger and more sinister than a simple kidnapping case. The silence between heartbeats had been broken, but Sarah suspected that the full truth was still waiting to be discovered. The Millbrook General Hospital had never seen anything like it. 12 victims of prolonged drugging and medical experimentation filled an entire wing, while teams of specialists worked around the clock to assess the damage and begin the long process of recovery. Sarah sat in the hospital cafeteria at 3 a.m., her third cup of coffee growing cold as she reviewed the preliminary medical reports. The news was mixed. Some victims were responding well to treatment and showing signs of full recovery, while others might face long-term effects from whatever experimental drugs had been pumped into their systems. Eleanor Whitmore was among the luckier ones. After 18 hours of medical observation, she was alert and coherent, though still weak from her ordeal. Emma had arrived from the safe house and hadn't left her mother's bedside since. Detective Chen, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the lead physician treating the victims, approached with a stack of files. "I have some preliminary results you need to see." Sarah looked up from her coffee. "Good news or bad news?" "Both. The good news is that most of the victims will make full recoveries. The drugs they were given were sophisticated but not permanently damaging in most cases. And the bad news?" Dr. Martinez sat down across from her. "The bad news is what those drugs were designed to do. We've never seen anything like these compounds. They appear to enhance certain cognitive and physical functions while suppressing others." "Enhancement protocols," Sarah said, remembering Judge Walsh's words. They were trying to create some kind of super soldiers or super agents. Something like that. The scary part is how advanced the research was. Whoever developed these compounds knew exactly what they were doing. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Doctor, in your professional opinion, could this research have been developed by a small-town doctor working alone?" "Absolutely not. This would require a team of biochemists, neurologists, and pharmacologists working with advanced laboratory equipment. We're talking about millions of dollars in research and development," which meant the conspiracy was even larger than Sarah had realized. Morrison, Dr. Voss, and Judge Walsh were just the local implementers of a research program that extended far beyond Millbrook. "There's something else," Dr. Martinez continued. "We found tracking chips implanted in several of the victims, subcutaneous devices that would allow someone to monitor their location and vital signs remotely. They were being tracked. More than that, the chips appear to be capable of delivering drugs directly into the bloodstream on command. Someone could have controlled these people's behavior from a distance." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Torres. "Meet me in conference room B." We found something in the barn you need to see." She thanked Dr. Martinez and made her way through the hospital corridors to the conference room, where Torres was waiting with a laptop and several boxes of evidence recovered from Judge Walsh's farm. "Tell me you have good news," Sarah said. "Have interesting news. We found Dr. Voss's research files hidden in a concealed compartment in the barn." Torres opened the laptop and showed her a series of documents. The research program is called Project Renaissance, and it's been running for over 5 years. Sarah scanned the files, her horror growing with each page. Detailed medical records, psychological profiles, and progress reports on dozens of test subjects, not just the 12 they'd rescued, but many others whose fates were unknown. How many people were involved in this? Based on these files, at least 40 subjects over the past 5 years. The 12 we found were just the current batch. What happened to the others? Torres's expression was grim. Some were released. When the experiments were complete, others, the files used terms like permanent placement and final disposition. Sarah felt sick. They weren't just dealing with kidnapping and illegal medical experimentation. They were dealing with murder on a massive scale. "There's more," Torres continued. "The funding for Project Renaissance came from something called the Prometheus Foundation. I've been trying to trace it, but it's buried under layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. Corporate conspiracy, has to be. No one else would have the resources to fund this kind of research." Sarah's phone rang, showing Emma Whitmore's number. "Detective Chen, my mother wants to talk to you. She says she remembered something important." 10 minutes later, Sarah was back at Eleanor's bedside. The woman looked fragile, propped up against the hospital pillows, but her eyes were clear and focused. "Detective, I need to tell you about the others." "What others, Mrs. Whitmore?" "The people who weren't part of the experiments, the ones who were helping from the outside." Eleanor's voice was still weak, but her words carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much. "During my time in the barn, I was more conscious than they realized. The drugs didn't always work perfectly, and sometimes I could hear conversations." "What did you hear?" "They talked about their funding source, a company called Prometheus, but they also mentioned local people who were helping them identify suitable subjects." Sarah leaned forward. "School administrators who provided student records, social workers who identified vulnerable teenagers, even some parents who sold their children to the program." The magnitude of the conspiracy was staggering. It wasn't just a few corrupt officials, it was a network that had infiltrated multiple levels of the community. "Mrs. Whitmore did you hear any specific names?" Eleanor nodded weakly. "Principal Davidson at the high school. Sarah Martinez from the Department of Children and Family Services, and Detective. There was another police officer involved, someone they called the Colonel." Sarah's blood ran cold. There was only one officer in the Millbrook Police Department who'd earned that nickname, Captain Robert Sterling, a 25-year veteran who'd served 2 tours in Iraq before joining the force. If Sterling was involved, then the corruption went all the way to the top of the department. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you certain about Captain Sterling?" "They never used his real name, but they talked about someone with military experience who was helping them recruit subjects from troubled backgrounds. Someone who had access to police records and could make sure certain investigations were buried." Sarah thanked Eleanor and stepped into the hallway, her mind racing. If Sterling was part of the conspiracy, then he knew about their investigation, their evidence, and their plans to expose the network. She called Torres immediately. Mike, we have a problem. Captain Sterling is involved. Are you sure, Eleanor? Whitmore heard them talking about the colonel. Who else could that be? There was a long pause before Torres responded. Sarah, if Sterling is dirty, then we can't trust anyone in the department. We need to contact the FBI immediately. But Sarah had a sinking feeling that they might already be too late. Sterling had access to all their case files, all their evidence, and all their plans. The conspiracy would know they were coming long before federal agents could mount an effective response. The silence between heartbeats had become the silence before an explosion. And Sarah Chen was standing at ground zero. Captain Robert Sterling had been Sarah's mentor when she first joined the Millbrook Police Department 15 years ago. He'd taught her how to read crime scenes, how to interview suspects, and how to navigate the complex politics of small-town law enforcement. She'd trusted him with her career, her cases, and occasionally her life, which made the phone call she was about to make one of the hardest things she'd ever done. Sarah sat in her car in the hospital parking lot. Torres beside her, with a secured satellite phone borrowed from the state police. They'd agreed that regular channels couldn't be trusted. If Sterling was monitoring department communications, he'd know about any calls to federal law enforcement. FBI Field Office, Agent Patricia. Wells speaking. Agent Wells, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the Millbrook Police Department. I need to report a conspiracy involving kidnapping, human experimentation, and corruption at the highest levels of local law enforcement. There was a brief pause. Detective Chen, are you calling on a secure line? Yes, ma'am. Good. I've been expecting your call. Sarah felt her stomach drop. You've been expecting it. We've had the Millbrook area under investigation for 6 months. Your Captain Sterling has been on our radar as a person of interest in several federal cases. The relief that flooded through Sarah was almost overwhelming. The FBI had been building their own case against the conspiracy, which meant she and Torres weren't alone in their fight against a network that seemed to have unlimited resources. Agent Wells, we have 12 victims recovered from an illegal medical facility, and we've arrested several conspirators. But we believe the network extends much further. It does. Detective Chen, I need you and your partner to meet me at a secure location. We have a lot to discuss, and not much time to discuss it. An hour later, Sarah and Torres sat in a nondescript office building 30 miles outside Millbrook, surrounded by federal agents and evidence boards that made their own investigation look like amateur hour. Agent Wells was a woman in her 40s, with prematurely grey hair and the kind of focused intensity that came from years of hunting dangerous criminals. She briefed them on an investigation that had been running parallel to theirs for months. Project Renaissance is just one arm of a larger operation, Wells explained. The Prometheus Foundation has been conducting illegal human experiments in 12 states, using local conspirators to identify and procure subjects. How many victims are we talking about? Torres asked. Conservative estimate. Over 300 people in the past 5 years. Sarah felt sick. The scope of the conspiracy dwarfed anything she'd imagined. The experiments vary by location, Wells continued. Some sites focus on cognitive enhancement, others on physical augmentation. The Millbrook facility was apparently working on a combination of both. What's the ultimate goal? As near as we can determine, they're trying to create enhanced human beings for sale to the highest bidder. Military contractors, intelligence agencies, private security firms, anyone willing to pay for soldiers or agents with superhuman capabilities. Agent Wells pulled up a series of photographs on her laptop. These are some of the people we believe are involved at the national level. Sarah recognized none of the faces, but they all had the look of corporate executives or high-ranking government officials, people with the resources and connections to run a conspiracy of this magnitude. Where does Captain Sterling fit into all this? Sterling appears to be a regional coordinator. He identifies suitable locations, recruits local conspirators, and ensures that law enforcement investigations are misdirected or buried. How long has he been doing this? We think at least 8 years, possibly longer. Sarah tried to process the implications. For nearly a decade, Sterling had been using his position to facilitate the kidnapping and abuse of young people, all while maintaining his reputation as a dedicated public servant. Agent Wells, what do you need from us? We need you to continue your investigation as if nothing has changed. Sterling can't know that we're onto him, or he'll disappear along with evidence we need to prosecute the entire network. You want us to go back to work for a man we know is a criminal. I want you to help us catch him in the act of covering up evidence or obstructing justice. With the right evidence, we can flip him and get him to testify against his superiors. Sarah wasn't comfortable with the idea of pretending to trust Sterling while gathering evidence against him, but she understood the strategic necessity. Taking down one regional coordinator was less important than exposing the entire network. What about the victims we rescued? Are they safe? They're under federal protection now. Sterling won't be able to get to them. Agent Wells handed Sarah a small device that looked like a standard police radio. This is a secure communication device. If Sterling makes any moves against you or tries to interfere with evidence, contact me immediately. As they prepared to leave, Wells pulled Sarah aside. Detective Chen, I want you to know that what you've accomplished here is remarkable. Most local law enforcement officers would have been intimidated into backing down or would have been eliminated by the conspiracy. You've saved lives and exposed a network that we've been hunting for years. It's not over yet. No, it's not. And the most dangerous part is still ahead. Sterling is going to realize soon that his network has been compromised, and cornered animals are always the most dangerous. Sarah drove back to Millbrook with Torres, both of them lost in thought. The town looked exactly the same as it had. Weak, agonet houses, well-maintained streets. The kind of place where people raised families and planned for retirement. But now, Sarah knew the truth that lay beneath the surface. The conspiracy had turned Millbrook into a hunting ground, using the community's trust and institutions to identify and capture victims for their twisted experiments. As they pulled into the police station parking lot, Sarah saw Captain Sterling's car in its usual spot. He was waiting for them, probably expecting a briefing on their investigation. Sarah took a deep breath and checked that the FBI's secure radio was properly concealed in her jacket. The next few hours would determine whether they could gather enough evidence to bring down the entire network, or whether Sterling would realize what they knew and eliminate them before they could act. The silence between heartbeats had become the silence between predator and prey, and Sarah wasn't entirely sure which role she was playing. Captain Sterling was waiting in his office when Sarah and Torres returned to the station, his expression unreadable as he gestured for them to sit down. The office looked exactly as it always had: commendations on the walls, family photos on the desk, the American flag standing in the corner. But now Sarah saw it all through different eyes. "Hell of a thing, what you two uncovered at that farm," Sterling said, his voice carrying the same paternal tone he'd used when praising Sarah's work over the years. 12 people held against their will. Thank God you found them when you did. Yes, sir, Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. We're still processing all the evidence. I'm sure you are. Morrison, Voss, Judge Walshard, to believe people we trusted could be involved in something like this. Sterling's performance was flawless. If Sarah hadn't known better, she would have believed he was genuinely shocked and disgusted by the conspiracy. Captain, there's something else, Torres said. We found evidence that suggests the network might be larger than just the people we arrested. How so? Sarah watched Sterling's face carefully as Torres explained about the Prometheus Foundation and the evidence of a multi-state operation. She was looking for any sign that Sterling already knew these details, any tell that would confirm his involvement. She found it in his eyes. Just for a moment, when Torres mentioned Project Renaissance, Sterling's expression shifted from surprise to calculation before returning to concerned authority. That's disturbing news, Sterling said. We'll need to coordinate with federal agencies to make sure we're not dealing with something beyond our capabilities. Already in progress, sir, Sarah said. The FBI has been briefed on our findings. This time, Sterling's poker face slipped completely. Sarah saw anger flash across his features before he controlled himself. Good thinking, though in the future, I'd prefer to be consulted before we involve federal agencies in local cases. Of course, Captain, it all happened very quickly. Sterling stood and walked to his window, looking out at the quiet streets of Millbrook. You? No, Sarah. In 25 years of law enforcement, I've learned that things are rarely as simple as they first appear. Sir, take this conspiracy, for example. On the surface, it looks like a group of criminals using young people for medical experiments. But what if there's more to it? What if these experiments were actually designed to help people? Sarah felt her blood turn cold. Sterling was testing her, trying to gauge how much she knew and whether she might be sympathetic to the conspiracy's goals. I'm not sure I follow, Captain. Sterling turned back to face her. Imagine if we could enhance human capabilities, make people stronger, smarter, more resilient. The applications for law enforcement alone would be revolutionary, at the cost of kidnapping and drugging innocent people. Sometimes progress requires difficult choices. The question is whether the potential benefits justify the methods. Torres shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Captain, are you suggesting that what happened to those victims was justified? Sterling's smile was cold and calculating. I'm suggesting that there might be perspectives on this case that you haven't considered. Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward the secure radio in her jacket, but she forced herself to remain calm. Sterling was revealing himself, but she needed him to say something more concrete before the FBI could act. Captain, the victims we rescued were traumatized and drugged against their will. Some of them may never fully recover, and that's tragic, of course. But consider the larger picture. What if their sacrifice could lead to breakthroughs that save thousands of lives? What if we could create enhanced soldiers who could end wars more quickly with fewer casualties? You're talking about human experimentation. I'm talking about human evolution. The words were almost identical to what Judge Walsh had said in the barn, confirming what Sarah had already suspected. Sterling wasn't just aware of the conspiracy, he was one of its architects. Captain, I think there's been a misunderstanding, Sarah said carefully. Our job is to enforce the law, not to decide whether breaking it might serve some greater good. Expression hardened. Your job, Detective Chen, is to do what you're told. And right now, I'm telling you that this investigation needs to be scaled back. On what grounds? On the grounds that you're in over your head and interfering with operations you don't understand. Torres spoke up. Captain, with respect, we have a duty to the victims and their families. You have a duty to this department and to me, Sterling snapped. And I'm ordering you to limit your investigation to the specific individuals you've already arrested. Sarah realized that Sterling was making a critical mistake. He was using his authority to obstruct justice, which was exactly the kind of evidence the FBI needed to build their case against him. Captain, are you ordering us to ignore evidence of a larger conspiracy? I'm ordering you to focus on what you can prove in court, not to go chasing after shadows and federal conspiracies. And if we refuse, Sterling's hand moved to the service weapon on his belt. A gesture so subtle that someone who didn't know him might have missed it. I don't think you want to refuse, Detective. Your career has been built on following orders and trusting your superiors. Don't throw that away now. Sarah activated the secure radio in her jacket, hoping the FBI was monitoring the frequency. Captain, I've spent 15 years following your orders because I believed you were a good man fighting for justice. If you're asking me to cover up crimes against innocent people, then maybe I was wrong about you. Sterling's facade finally cracked completely. You were wrong about a lot of things, Sarah. You think this is some simple case of good versus evil. But the world is more complicated than that. It's not complicated at all. You helped kidnap and torture young people for money. I helped advance human potential for the betterment of society by selling teenagers to corporate researchers. Sterling drew his weapon, his movements swift and professional. I'm sorry it has to end this way, Sarah. You were a good detective, but you never learned when to look the other way. Torres was reaching for his own gun when the office door burst open and FBI agents flooded in, their weapons drawn and trained on Sterling. Federal agents, drop your weapon. Sterling's eyes darted between the agents and Sarah, his face a mask of rage and betrayal. You've been wearing a wire. I've been doing my job. Agent Wells stepped forward, her weapon steady. Captain Sterling, you're under arrest for conspiracy, kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and attempted murder of a federal officer. As Sterling was handcuffed and read his rights, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and sadness. The man who'd been her mentor and role model for 15 years was a criminal who'd used his position to facilitate unspeakable crimes. But more than that, Sterling's arrest marked the beginning of the end for a conspiracy that had destroyed countless lives in the pursuit of profit and power. 6 months later, Sarah Chen stood at the podium in the Millbrook Community Center, looking out at an audience that included survivors, families, federal agents, and journalists from across the country. The room was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds watching on screens in adjacent rooms. The Project Renaissance trials had concluded the previous week, resulting in convictions for 43 individuals across 12 states. Captain Sterling had ultimately cooperated with federal investigators, providing testimony that helped dismantle the entire network in exchange for a reduced sentence of 25 years in federal prison. But the trials were only part of the story. The real victory was measured in the lives that had been saved and the survivors who were rebuilding their futures. When I first investigated Eleanor Whitmore's disappearance, Sarah began, I thought I was dealing with a simple missing person case. I had no idea that I was about to uncover a conspiracy that had been operating in plain sight for nearly a decade. In the front row, Eleanor sat with her daughter Emma, both of them healthy and whole after months of recovery and therapy. Carlos Santos had returned to college and was playing basketball again. Ashley Thompson was studying veterinary medicine as she'd always planned. Marcus Webb had started a non-profit organization to help other survivors of human trafficking. The people responsible for Project Renaissance succeeded for so long because they understood something fundamental about human nature, Sarah continued. We trust the institutions and individuals we're supposed to trust. We believe that doctors want to heal, that judges want justice, and that police officers want to protect and serve. Dr. Voss had received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Judge Walsh was serving 30 years in federal prison. Detective Morrison had been sentenced to 25 years and would never work in law enforcement again. But the real heroes of this story aren't the law enforcement officers who exposed the conspiracy, Sarah said. The real heroes are Eleanor Whitmore, who risked everything to document what she saw, and the survivors who endured unimaginable trauma but never gave up hope. Eleanor stood briefly and nodded to the crowd, her eyes bright with tears but her posture strong and determined. The applause was thunderous and sustained, a recognition not just of her courage but of the price she'd paid for it. The investigation revealed that Project Renaissance had processed over 400 victims across 12 states over an 8-year period. Sarah continued when the applause died down. Many of those victims will never be found. Some were released after the experiments were completed, their memories altered or suppressed. Others were sold to private buyers or government agencies that we may never identify. The sobering reality hung heavy in the room. For all their success in dismantling the conspiracy, Sarah knew that the full scope of the crimes would never be known. But today isn't just about remembering the victims. It's about ensuring that something like Project Renaissance can never happen again. Sarah outlined the reforms that had been implemented in the wake of the trials. Enhanced oversight of medical research facilities, mandatory reporting requirements for missing persons cases, federal task forces dedicated to investigating human trafficking networks. Most importantly, a new protocol had been established for law enforcement agencies to follow when investigating cases that might involve official corruption. The protocol was being called the Whitmore Standard, in honor of Eleanor's determination to seek the truth, regardless of the personal cost. Eleanor Whitmore taught us that silence in the face of evil is complicity, Sarah said. She showed us that sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones we trust the most, and that the only way to stop them is to refuse to look the other way. As Sarah concluded her speech, she thought about the long journey that had brought them all to this moment. It had started with a missing person report and a pool of blood on a Persian rug, but it had ended with justice for hundreds of victims and the exposure of a network that had operated with impunity for years. The silence between heartbeats had been broken forever. After the ceremony, Sarah walked through the quiet streets of Millbrook, reflecting on how much the town had changed in the past 6 months. On the surface, it looked much the same: neat houses, well-maintained lawns, the kind of place where people still felt safe raising their children. But the community had been forced to confront an uncomfortable truth about the darkness that could hide beneath the most innocent facades. Trust, once given freely, was now earned through transparency and accountability. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Agent Wells. New case in Oregon. Possible Renaissance connection. Interested, Sarah looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there, other conspiracies were operating. Other victims were waiting to be found. Other Eleanor Whitmores were documenting crimes that more powerful people wanted to keep hidden. She typed back, "On my way." The silence between heartbeats would always be there, waiting to be filled with truth or lies, with justice or corruption, with the courage to act or the comfort of willful blindness. But as long as there were people willing to listen to that silence and break it when necessary, evil would never be allowed to operate unopposed. Sarah Chen had learned that lesson from Eleanor Whitmore, and she would carry it with her wherever the next case might lead. The story of Project Renaissance was over, but the fight for truth and justice would continue as long as there were those brave enough to refuse the silence and speak for those who could not speak for themselves. In the end, that was the real meaning of the phrase Eleanor had written in her final journal entry: "Look for the silence between heartbeats." It wasn't just about finding hidden clues or uncovering secret evidence. It was about recognizing that the moments between words, between breaths, between heartbeats, are where the truth lives on, where the courage to act on that truth is born.